Your brothers. Okay, Erev Tov. So we were going through the halachot of Tisha B'Av. One of the things we spoke about last night was the sections of Torah that you're allowed to learn on Tisha B'Av. Most of them you're not, but there's plenty that one can learn. Another question which comes up is regarding those things, parts of Tefillah. We have Psukim and we have Prakim of Tanakh, etc., which appear as part of Tefillah, and are we allowed to say those? So the general principle is that anything which is said not for the sake of learning, but is said as part of for the sake of Tefillah, that would be okay. But there are parts, for example, we say Birkot Torah every morning, and immediately after Birkot Torah, we say certain sections, Psukim, etc., for the purpose of learning. The reason we say them, we mentioned Birkot Torah a few nights ago. But the reason why we say those psukim afterwards, because there's a question after you've said Birkat Torah, is there a hefsek if you don't start learning immediately? So we say those things. So we say, should we cut down? Should we minimize? The question also comes up by Slichot, similar regarding Birkat Torah. We mentioned a couple of nights ago also the question of hirhur. We're talking about whether thinking of Divrei Torah is considered the same as learning for different halachot. So in Slichot as well, there are many different psukim and many things that we add on. And then the psukim Shulchan Aruch discusses whether one is allowed to say those parts of Slichot before one has said because of Torah. And again, there you're allowed to because it's considered as tachanunim, it's not considered as limud Torah. It would be a similar principle that would apply over here. He explains it as follows. He says, Rov haplakim shenomrim b'seder korbanot nikvu mishnei ta'amim. Right, so the whole section before Psukei Zimra, korbanot, etc., which we say there are two reasons why we say most of those sections, the parts that we do. Aleph, ketachlif lekorbanot ukachana letfilah. Right, so the sections of korbanot, different psukim of the olah, the tamid, etc., we say those partially as a way of preparing for tefillah, but partially because we can no longer bring the korbanot right now. By learning those parts, or by saying those parts, that is a substitution for bringing the korbanot. And bet, right, in order that we will be able to learn every day and fulfill that precept of Vagita bo yamam v'layla, at least to the minimum extent. Therefore, we have sections of Mikra, of Mishnah, and of Talmud. So, Mimele b'Tisha B'Av, she'asur limud Torah, as we've been discussing on Tisha B'Av, we cannot learn Torah in an ordinary manner. Mitorelet she'ela, ha'im efshar lomar et haplakim ha'elu. The question therefore arises: can we say these verses? V'dat rabim, kol ma shu chelek miseder hatfilah, ikar inyano letzorach hatfilah. So as we already said, and this seems to be the majority opinion, anything that is part of the seder hatfilah, anything that's part of the is part of davening, al ken mutar lomar gam b'Tisha B'Av, that can be said on Tisha B'Av as usual. כך נוהגים רבים מיוצאי ספרד, חלק מיוצאי אשכנז, ויש אומרים, and there is a second, a minority opinion, שלכל אדם מותר לומר בתשעה באב רק את משהו רגיל לומר בכל יום בסדר תפילה. That only that which a person is used to saying. The truth is a person's probably only going to say those parts that he's used to saying anyway, and it's a little bit strange if you're skipping over korbanot every day, but on Tisha B'Av dafka you come along and say it. Okay, so the person should say, the point is the person can say what they normally say, what if it appears in the Siddur, that is part of the Tefillah, that's not considered learning. Right. Yesh nagim lomar b'chol yom kama pirkei Tehillim. So the similar question that comes up, those people not, obviously the Pirkei Tehillim that are part of Psukei Zimra, that are part of davening, we say as normal. There are certain sections, right, the Shir Shel Yom, for example, which we don't say in Shachrit, we postpone to Mincha, when already then some of the laws of mourning and customs, etc., are lessened a little bit after Chatzot. But some people have the custom to say extra, additional Pirkei Tehillim every day, and then every month or every few months, whatever, we'll finish Sefer Tehillim. But Tisha B'Av adif shelo lomram ulashlimam lemachor. It's best not to say those on Tisha B'Av. V'rotze lismoch al hamakilim lomram achar Chatzot rashai. And if a person needs to, there's what to rely on to say them after Chatzot. Now, regarding the brachot that we say, so there's one bracha where there is a question, which is the bracha of Shasali Kol Tzorki, one of the Birkot HaShachar, which relates to, the Gemara explains, Yesh B'hoda al Neilat HaNa'alayim. This relates to our shoes. But since on Tisha B'Av we don't wear shoes, we all wear shoes, but not shoes in the halachic sense of, with leather shoes. And therefore, since it's asur to wear shoes on Tisha B'Av, and also on Yom Kippur, the same question comes up. Therefore, should one say this bracha as usual? So he says, Nagu yotzei Ashkenaz, umiktzat miyotzei Sfarad le'omur. The common practice amongst Ashkenazim and against some Sfaradim is to say the bracha as usual. Why? Because it's not, I'm not giving thanks for the fact that I today am wearing shoes, but in general, that it exists, right? That's the Gemara has the whole discussion, and the poskim talk about somebody, are the Birkot HaShachar a bracha for me? Is it subjective or is it objective? For example, can a blind person say the bracha for Keach Ivrim? You can't see. So if it just applies to him, if it's subjective, there would be a problem. If we say it's a general bracha, so then that's okay. Again, on Tisha B'Av, you'd say, since everybody is not allowed to wear shoes today, maybe not. But nonetheless, we say, since it's a Hodah Klalit, that is where the custom comes from, to continue to say the bracha as usual in the morning. Okay, there are certain types of shoes that we do wear, that we can wear, and therefore we can say it. He brings here another reason why we would be able to say it. After the fast goes that you go home, and at night you'll probably put on shoes. The brachot that we say, Birkot HaShachar, that applies for the entire day, and not even though the night is part of the next day for many aspects. But the bracha goes from the morning till the evening. That's why, like on Shavuot or other times where we don't sleep, if one's up all night, and then the question about saying Birkot HaTorah, Birkot HaShachar in the morning, most of the Birkot HaShachar we say even if a person has not slept, there is no problem whatsoever to say them, because they start anew every morning. They go from the morning till the night, and therefore this bracha would still apply for the night time. Ulam ledat Hari, ein nevarech bracha zo b'yamim elu. Right? The Arizal said that one should not say the bracha. And that is the minhag of many Sfaradim. So another question that comes up is Kriyat Shema al Hamitah, but just before we go to sleep, which includes many psukim and Tehillim and prakim, etc. So one is allowed to say that as normal. It's the same principle throughout, that these are verses that are said not as a form of learning, but as a form of tefillah, and therefore that is permitted. Okay. A few words about Asiri B'Av, the 10th of Av. I know we haven't got into Tisha B'Av yet, but we won't have a chance to talk about it before then. So I'll mention now as well. It says, B'yom HaShvi'i l'chodesh Av, kavshu ha'bavlim et Beit HaMikdash u'b'tisha B'Av lifnot erev hitzitu bo esh. So we go back historically, in the times of the first Beit HaMikdash, it was on the 7th day of Av that the Bavlim conquered the Beit HaMikdash. They began to set it alight, to destroy it, towards the evening of the 9th of Av, Tisha B'Av. So the Beit HaMikdash was actually burning. Most of the destruction took place not on the 9th, but on the 10th. Rabbi Yochanan said, if it was up to him, he would have established the fast a day later, because that was the day in which the majority of the Eichal was burnt. There were those who had the custom to fast for 2 days. Okay, we don't do that anymore. By the way, the other place where it's brought up that there was a custom in some communities to fast for 2 days is Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, we know we have Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galiot, and there were those, the Ramah quotes this, there were those who would have the extra day, but it was a sakana, and most communities did not adopt it, and nowadays we only have 1 day. But so here too, there were those who had the practice to fast for 2 days, but generally speaking, for most people that was too difficult. We go by the beginning, and therefore the beginning of the Purim, the beginning of the destruction was on the 9th. That is the day, and of course all the other tragedies which occurred on Tisha B'Av. So that is the day we fast. But because so much of the destruction took place on the 10th, so Chachamim made a few restrictions applied to the 10th as well. And here it gets a bit confusing, because some years, some people think that when it's Motzei Shabbat, so we get to the 10th of Av and immediately all the restrictions are released. And the reason why people may think that is because in many years, there are 2 scenarios in which Tisha B'Av is on Motzei Shabbat. There's like this year, where it actually is on Motzei Shabbat, which is not going to happen again for another 20 years. It goes with Purim Mishulash and Erev Pesach. Tisha B'Av is always the same day of the week as Pesach. But it can happen that Tisha B'Av itself falls on Shabbat. So if Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, is on Shabbat, it's postponed to Motzei Shabbat. And then we would practice everything in the same way we do it this year. Only the difference then would be that since it's been postponed, you get to the night after, it's no longer the 10th of Av, it's the 11th of Av, and then, okay, all the restrictions are waived. But this year, that is not the case. This year, the case is that the 10th of Av is still the 10th of Av, and therefore, we have those restrictions, which are, certainly everybody agrees that le'echol basar v'lo lishtod yain, we continue not to eat meat or not to drink wine the night after the fast, and again, with the exception of Havdalah, with grape juice, as we've discussed, but that is until there are those who have that minhag for the whole day. There are Sephardi communities who, for the entire day of the 10th of Av, would not eat meat or drink wine, but the minhag Yotzei Ashkenaz, it's just until Chatzot, until midday, halachic midday on the 10th of Av. What about the other restrictions? So generally, other restrictions which would continue until Chatzot is en lechabes or lebosh b'gadim mechubasim. So it's still regarding laundry and regarding fresh clothes. Ve'en listaper ve'nishma muzika mesamachat. Right, to have haircuts, to have listen to joyful music. Ve'en lilchotz b'chamim, and again washing for pleasure. One wants to, the way that we would wash during the 9 days. One can wash in that way on the night of the 10th as well. Now, there are those who say that it's only meat and wine that one has to refrain from on the 10th of Av, and all the other restrictions are waived. But ideally, one should be stringent like those. If there's a shatat chak, so an extenuating circumstance, sometimes, what often happens, a person's going away or, traveling like the next morning, and there's literally no time to wash one's clothes, etc. So in a situation like that, there's what to rely on. But meat and wine should definitely be avoided until Chatzot of the next day. Also, nahagim shelo levarach shechianu b'yom hasi b'av kadin shloshet hashavuot. If one can, should wait with the shechianu for another day. Another custom that we have at the end of the fast is to say kiddush levana. And the practice is normally we would have said kiddush levana already earlier in the month, but we're taught that kiddush levana comes along with a certain level of simcha. And as we've said, b'tishat hayamim misha nichnas av v'matim b'simcha. So we wait until after Tisha B'Av in order to say Kiddush Levana. It's Rabim noagim lo'omra miyad achar tfilat arvit sheb'siyum hatzom. There are those who will say Kiddush Levana immediately after Maariv. But lechatchila ein ra'oi lenogaf. Lechatchila, the ideal thing to do is to wait a little bit, to make Havdalah, to have something to eat, to drink, etc. And then to say Kiddush Levana when one's not still hungry, etc. Because then you have a bit more simcha. But if it's impossible, if everyone's going to go home and eat, and then you're not going to be able to come back, etc., so then it's okay. Then you can say it earlier. And I'll just mention here as well something I mentioned the other night. But particularly if you're staying behind and you have to do Kiddush Levana, etc., and the whole thing, so it may take a long time to get home. And again, if a woman or anybody, if a woman is waiting at home for her husband to come back in order to break the fast, so we said that if you want to eat or drink anything other than water, one needs to make Havdalah first at the end of Tisha B'Av. So generally speaking, women don't make Havdalah for themselves. It's different as Svekot in Halakha, why we would avoid that. But on this not Motzei Shabbat, on this Sunday night, if a woman's waiting for a long time and she's hungry and she needs to make Havdalah by herself before her husband comes home, that is acceptable and she can do that. Rabbi Hanania ben Akasha אומר, "Tzakadosh Baruch Hu lezakot Yisrael, לפרחו בעליהם תור מצוות, שני מעדרי חפץ למען צדקו, יגדיר תורה